My name's Sergeant Claire Redden, badge number 261. I've worn this uniform for 8 years, and in that time, I've dealt with everything from drunk brawls outside the bar on Main Street to meth labs hidden in farm sheds. Nothing, not one damn thing, prepared me for that morning. The day started like any other shift. Coffee in a paper cup, half warm by the time I clocked in. The chatter of dispatch on the radio. The low hum of the AC in the squad room. I remember laughing at some stupid meme my partner showed me on his phone. Normal. Then the sirens started. Not ours, not police. These were everywhere. Air raid sirens, long and drawn out, echoing off the buildings in a way I'd only ever heard during tornado drills in high school. "What's going on?" I asked dispatch as I grabbed my radio. Static. Then a voice, our dispatcher, Maria, but she sounded shaken. County's saying civil unrest in Brookhaven. Units are on standby. They're telling us, just stay in place until further notice. Brookhaven was 20 miles east, a bigger city. We'd get there spillover sometimes. Fugitives, gangs, drugs. But civil unrest was just code for riots. That was my first thought. A riot. Only there was something in Maria's voice. Something I hadn't heard before. By noon, calls were coming in faster than we could log them. A man in the grocery store biting customers. A car accident on Route 14, where the driver had gotten out and started attacking people on foot. Then a house fire with screaming inside. But when fire crews went in, they came back pale and silent. One of the firefighters vomited on the curb. I was halfway to responding to a domestic when the first emergency broadcast cut in. Every radio, every TV, even the damn billboards downtown lit up with the same message. This is the National Emergency Alert System. Stay indoors. Avoid contact with infected individuals. The pathogen is transmitted through bites and blood exposure. If attacked, do not attempt to reason with the infected. Use lethal force. Bites. Blood exposure. That was the moment my stomach dropped. Around 1 p.m., my partner and I were sent to check on a report of a woman screaming in the street, near the old post office. We rolled up slow. I saw her immediately, maybe mid-40s, clothes soaked in what I thought was mud. She was bent over something on the pavement. It wasn't until we got closer that I realized it wasn't something. It was someone. She was tearing at his throat with her teeth. The sound. God, the sound was wet and animal, not human. "Police! Step away!" I shouted, hand on my sidearm. She didn't stop. Didn't even look at me. My partner grabbed the shotgun from the cruiser. I stepped closer. That's when her head jerked up and I froze. Her mouth was slick with blood, and her eyes. They weren't glazed like a drunk's. They were locked, unblinking, like she was staring through me. She stood, slow and twitching, and made a sound I'll never forget. A kind of low, rasping moan that vibrated in my bones. "Claire," my partner said quietly. "Yeah? I don't think she's alive." Then she charged. I don't remember pulling the trigger. Just the recoil in my hands, the deafening blast, and her crumpling to the pavement. The man she'd been attacking, he was gone. No breath, no pulse. But then, his fingers twitched. We backed away fast, weapons ready. His eyes snapped open. By the time we got back to the station, it was chaos. Half our officers were out on calls that went silent. Phones rang off the hook, unanswered. Maria, our dispatcher, was crying quietly at her desk. On the TV in the corner, the news was showing live footage of Brookhaven. Streets packed with people running, others shuffling after them, and gunfire everywhere. That was the first moment I realized this wasn't just our county. It wasn't even just the state. The whole damn country was unraveling. That night, the sirens didn't stop. Neither did the screaming. The first thing I remember from that afternoon was the smell. Copper and rot, so thick in the air it clung to the back of my throat. When you're a cop, you get used to bad smells, drunks, car wrecks, bodies after a few hot days. But this was different. This was sharp and sour, like the air itself was diseased. I was still in the station lobby when the second emergency broadcast hit. The overhead speakers crackled, drowning out the ringing phones. This is the Centers for Disease Control. The contagion identified as the Calderon virus is highly infectious and spreads through the transfer of infected blood and saliva. If bitten or scratched, isolate the victim immediately. There is no known cure. Stay indoors. Conserve resources. Do not engage unless necessary. The phrase "no known cure" made the room go silent. Not "we're working on one." Not temporary quarantine. No cure. I grabbed my gear bag, checked my sidearm, and stepped outside. The sky had gone the color of wet ash, and the streets looked wrong. Too empty in some places. Too crowded in others. Clusters of people moved in jagged lines, their movements jerky, heads snapping toward any sound. It took me a moment to realize they weren't talking. Not a word. The call came from Miller Avenue. Possible survivor trapped in vehicle. I knew the area well. Narrow street, brick apartment blocks, and too many blind corners. My partner, Jake, was already behind the wheel before I shut my door. We didn't talk much on the drive, just the whine of the sirens and the occasional thud of something hitting the cruiser as we passed. When we got there, I spotted the car immediately. A red sedan, driver's door hanging open, glass shattered across the pavement. A woman sat inside, pressed back against her seat like she was trying to vanish. Blood ran down her arm, soaking her blouse. And just beyond her hood, two figures crouched low to the ground, feeding on something I couldn't see. "Claire!" Jake's voice was a warning. I nodded, drew my weapon, and approached slow. The figures didn't stop eating when I got close. They didn't even flinch at my shadow. "Police!" I barked. "Step back now!" They lifted their heads in unison. One was a man in a shredded business suit, half his face gone. The other, I think she'd been a teenager. Her lips were stripped raw, teeth pink with blood. Then they came for me. I fired twice, center mass, like training taught me. They didn't slow down. Jake took the shotgun from the cruiser and fired a single shell. The sound was like a thunderclap in the narrow street. Both dropped instantly, and for the first time I noticed, it wasn't the body shots that worked. It was the head. I reached the sedan and crouched beside the woman. Her eyes darted between me and the corpses. "Are you bitten?" I asked. She hesitated. That was all I needed to see. Her sleeve was already soaked through, and beneath the fabric I saw the telltale mark. A deep crescent bite, skin torn away, muscle exposed. It was still bleeding, but not as much as it should have been. Almost like the blood was thickening. "You have to help me," she whispered. Jake was standing a few feet away, watching. I could tell he'd already made his decision. I hadn't. Not yet. "We can get you to the station," I started, but she cut me off. "No, don't take me anywhere. Just shoot me before I change." Her voice cracked on that last word. "We didn't shoot her. We couldn't." I told Jake to grab the medkit while I tried to stop the bleeding, but her skin was already turning pale, veins darkening under the surface. She began to twitch, her head jerking in short bursts. Her breathing hitched, then stopped. When her eyes opened again, they weren't hers anymore. We made it back to the station in silence. Neither of us spoke about what had happened in that car. But I knew Jake was thinking the same thing I was. The infection moved fast. Faster than anything I'd ever seen. One bite, and you had maybe an hour before you were gone. Inside, the TV was still on. The anchor was pale and sweating, papers shaking in his hands. We have confirmation the outbreak is now nationwide. Citizens are advised to prepare for prolonged isolation. Behind him, through the studio's glass wall, something slammed against the window hard enough to crack it. The camera jerked, then went black. That was the last normal news broadcast I ever saw. The next 12 hours felt like 3 days. By sunset, the streets were unrecognizable. Abandoned cars jammed intersections, some with their doors still open like the drivers had bailed mid-turn. Storefront glass was smashed, alarms blaring into the night air. Every now and then, a shape would move in the distance, slow, deliberate, unhurried. We stopped calling them attackers, or the infected. By that point, everyone was using the same word: zombies. The station was our last stronghold in town. Heavy doors, reinforced windows, and enough ammo in the armory to make us feel safe. That feeling didn't last long. We locked down the lobby first, flipped the deadbolts, dragged a steel security grate across the entrance. Maria sat at dispatch, answering calls she couldn't help with. Most of them ended the same way: screaming, then static. Jake and I were assigned to perimeter duty. That meant patrolling the outer windows, watching the parking lot and the streets beyond. We didn't talk much. Every groan in the distance made us tighten our grips on our weapons. Around 9 p.m., the mayor came on the local emergency channel. His voice was calm, too calm. Citizens of Ashburn County, we are declaring a full lockdown effective immediately. Do not attempt to leave your homes. Law enforcement will enforce a dusk to dawn curfew. Anyone found outside during this time will be detained for their own safety. It was a nice speech, but by then, nobody was enforcing anything. We weren't keeping people in. We were keeping things out. That night, I stood at the west window, watching the shadows crawl. A lone figure wandered into the parking lot, moving in that broken, stuttering gait I was starting to recognize. She was barefoot, one arm hanging by a strip of skin, her head tilted like she was listening for something. Maria's voice broke over the radio. "Unit 7. We've got movement on your side. Confirm?" I keyed my mic. Confirmed. One female, infected. Testing the doors. We watched her drag her nails down the metal, the sound setting my teeth on edge. Then she backed away, turning her head toward the street like she'd heard a call we couldn't. 2 more shapes emerged from the dark. Then 3. Then more than I could count. They gathered under the yellow glow of the parking lot light, staring at the building without moving. Jake came up beside me, shotgun in hand. "What do you think they're waiting for?" he asked. I didn't have an answer. By midnight, the phones had stopped ringing. Not because the crisis was over, because there was nobody left to call. The town had gone silent except for the low, constant moan outside the station. We could hear it through the walls, even down in the holding cells. Some of the younger officers were cracking. One kept pacing, muttering about his wife and kids on the other side of town. Another sat in the corner, staring at the floor, whispering that we should just open the doors and run for it. I kept my back straight, my hands steady, but inside I felt the same pull. Every second in that station felt like being buried alive. Around 3 a.m., we heard the first thud. Not a random bump, a deliberate, heavy impact against the front grate. Then another, then a chorus of them, as the horde outside began pressing against the building. "Hold your fire," the lieutenant ordered. "No point wasting ammo until they breach." I stared at the grate, listening to the groan of metal under strain. The only thing between us and them was a few inches of steel, and I wasn't sure how long that would hold. The sound of the horde outside was the kind that seeped into your bones. Low moans, punctuated by sharp bursts of something almost like speech. Short, guttural syllables that didn't form words but carried intent. The kind of sounds that made you want to lock yourself in a closet and cover your ears. I sat at the west window again, shotgun across my lap. The parking lot light flickered, casting everything in stuttering shadows. That's when I saw her. The same woman from earlier, barefoot, arm hanging by a strip of skin. But now she was standing still, directly under the light, head tilted up toward me. I couldn't move. Her face was slack, but her eyes, they weren't drifting like the others. They were locked on mine. Jake came up beside me. "She hasn't moved in 20 minutes, he muttered. "Maybe she's stuck." But I knew she wasn't stuck. Every time I shifted my stance, her head tilted, following. Maria's voice crackled over the radio. "West window, you've got more incoming. 2 dozen, maybe more." And they came, shuffling out of the dark, one by one, until the parking lot was almost full. They didn't push at the building, not yet. They just stood there, swaying slightly, staring up at the window. At me. The lieutenant ordered us to rotate watch, but I couldn't sleep. I lay on the cot in the break room, listening to the muffled groans through the walls, feeling each one vibrate in my chest. Around 2 a.m., a sharp metallic clang jolted me upright. I grabbed my sidearm and ran to the lobby. Jake was already there, standing rigid. The front grate was shaking, hard enough to rattle the frame. Beyond it, pale faces pressed against the bars, mouths opening and closing in slow unison. No hands reaching, no pounding, just watching. "They're not trying to get in," Jake whispered. "They're waiting." I took a step forward, against every instinct, until I was close enough to see their eyes. Most were glassy and unfocused, but hers, the barefoot woman, burned like embers in the dark. She tilted her head again, and then, in a voice so faint I thought I imagined it, she said my name. "Claire!" I stumbled back, hitting the wall. Jake grabbed my arm. "You heard that too, right?" I nodded, throat dry. Outside, the moaning picked up, a low chorus rising and falling, the sound wrapping around my ribs like cold wire. That was the moment I stopped thinking of them as mindless. Something was still in there, something that remembered. By dawn, the lot was empty, no sign they'd ever been there, except for the streaks of dried blood on the grate. But I couldn't shake the feeling that she would be back. And next time, she wouldn't be alone. The morning light came in weak through the grimy station windows, pale and sickly. For the first time in days, the street outside was empty. No shuffling shapes, no dragging footsteps, no silent watchers. Maria brewed a pot of coffee on the camping stove, and for a moment it almost felt normal. Jake leaned back in his chair, rubbing his eyes. "Maybe they're moving on," he said. "Maybe we're..." He didn't get to finish. A single, bone-cracking thud shook the west wall. Then another. The sound was deep, heavy, not like fists, like something slamming its entire body into the brick. We all froze. The third impact rattled the window frames, dust falling from the ceiling. Maria swore and grabbed her rifle. "Positions," the lieutenant barked. We scattered to the barricades. Through the narrow gap in the west shutter, I saw them coming. Not dozens, hundreds, filling the street, climbing over each other, their skin hanging in strips, eyes fixed on the building. And at the front, moving with jerky precision, was the barefoot woman. Her head never wavered from the second-floor window. From me, they hit the barricades like a living wave. Metal shrieked, wood splintered. The first grate bowed inward, and I swear I heard ribs breaking. Theirs, not ours, as they forced themselves forward. Jake fired the first shot. The bullet punched through a skull, spraying blackened gore across the wall. But another head replaced it instantly. The air filled with gunfire and the wet crack of impacts. The smell hit next. Sweet rot, mixed with old copper and burned powder. Maria was shouting something over the noise. "Claire, north stairwell!" I turned and saw why. They'd broken through the back alley gate. The ones on that side weren't even trying to batter the doors. They were climbing the fire escape like spiders, fingers hooked into rusted metal. "Second floor! Move, move!" the lieutenant yelled. We fell back, firing in short bursts, conserving what ammo we had. Every shot seemed to draw more of them, their moans rising in pitch until it became one unbroken, deafening sound. We reached the stairwell just as the west barricade gave way with a metallic scream. The zombies poured in, a writhing tide of grey flesh and snapping teeth. I slammed the stairwell door behind us, locking it with the steel bolt. It rattled instantly under their weight. "Rooftop," the lieutenant ordered. "We go across to the next building. Claire, your point." The stairwell was narrow, littered with fallen plaster and abandoned gear. Our boots pounded on the steps, the noise echoing up into the gloom. Halfway up, a shape lunged out from the shadows. A man in a torn paramedic uniform, his mouth split wide, skin peeling from his jaw. I fired point blank. The recoil jolted up my arm, the shot echoing like thunder. He went down hard, but his fingers kept twitching as we stepped over him. We burst through the rooftop access door and into blinding light. Wind whipped at my hair, carrying the stink of decay from below. From up here I could see them, all of them. The streets were a seething mass, flowing around the station, pressing toward any movement. Some crawled on all fours, faster than the rest. Some stood unnaturally still, turning their heads in eerie unison. The barefoot woman was gone from sight. Jake pointed to the next building, a hardware store, its roof slightly lower than ours. "Go," the lieutenant barked. I ran to the edge, heart hammering, and jumped. My boots hit the gravel with a jolt that rattled my teeth. I turned just in time to see Maria land beside me. Then Jake. Then the lieutenant. Behind us, the rooftop door slammed open. They spilled out, one after another, shrieking now, a high animal sound that had nothing human left in it. The first one jumped, missed, and hit the alley 2 stories below with a sickening crunch. The second made it, hands clawing at the gravel as I kicked him back. "Don't stop," Maria shouted, hauling me toward the next jump. We crossed 2 more rooftops before we found our way down via a half-collapsed fire escape. The metal groaned under our weight, flakes of rust breaking off and spiraling into the alley. We hit the ground running. Every side street seemed alive, shadows shifting and groaning. We kept to the narrowest paths, weaving between abandoned cars and trash-strewn gutters. At one intersection, a bus blocked the road, its windows smeared with bloody handprints. Through the glass, I saw movement. A dozen faces pressed against the inside, jaws working. Jake didn't hesitate. He fired through the windshield. The glass shattered outward, but the noise drew more from every direction. We ducked into a small grocery store, slamming the door behind us. The air inside was thick with the smell of spoiled meat and mildew. Maria pulled a shelf in front of the door while I swept the aisles for supplies. Water, canned food, anything we could carry. That's when I heard it. A soft, dragging step. Not outside. Inside. I raised my shotgun and rounded the corner. A little boy stood in the cereal aisle, maybe 10 years old. His skin was pale, lips cracked, eyes cloudy. But he wasn't moving toward me. He just stood there, watching. And he smiled, a slow, unnatural stretch of the mouth, and whispered, "She's coming." Before I could react, the front window exploded inward. Hands reached through the broken glass, grabbing for us. The shelf toppled, cans clattering across the floor. "Back door, now!" The lieutenant roared. We crashed through the stockroom out into the alley and ran until my lungs burned. The horde was behind us, closer than ever, their footsteps slapping against the pavement in perfect rhythm. And over it all, rising like a thread through the chaos, was a single voice calling my name. "Claire?" We didn't stop until we reached the river. The old suspension bridge loomed ahead, its steel frame rusted but intact. "Over," the lieutenant said. Other side, we regroup. I didn't believe him. The way the sound carried on the wind, the way the shadows seemed to follow. I knew there would be no regroup. Not while she was out there. Not while she remembered me. The bridge groaned under our weight as we crossed. Every footstep echoed in the hollow steel bones, mingling with the wind that screamed through the girders. I kept glancing over my shoulder. The horde had stopped at the far bank, crowding the bridge entrance but not stepping onto it. They milled there, swaying like seaweed in a dark current. And at the very front, just barely visible, the barefoot woman stood still, her head tilted, watching us go. It wasn't relief I felt. It was the certainty that this wasn't over. Halfway across, the lieutenant stopped, scanning the horizon with his binoculars. Beyond the bridge, the land rose into low hills scattered with dead trees. To the right, I could make out the faint glint of rooftops. "Town?" Maria asked. "Maybe," he said. "But there's smoke. More than one column. Smoke meant fire, and fire meant people. In our world now, people were almost always worse news than the dead." We reached the far side and stepped onto cracked asphalt. The road forked, one branch climbing toward the hills, the other winding into a valley choked with brush. Jake knelt, running his fingers over something in the dirt. Tire tracks. Fresh, not just one vehicle, a whole line of them. "Caravan," he muttered. "Big one." Maria frowned. "Could be survivors. Could be worse," I said, my voice low. We took the road toward the town, moving fast but cautious. The silence was wrong. Even in abandoned places, you could usually hear the wind rattling loose shutters, or crows bickering over carrion. Here it was just still. No birds. No insects. No rustle of leaves. After about a mile, we saw the first sign. Literally, a hand-painted sign nailed to a tree. "Turn back. Quarantine zone." Jake snorted. "Guess they're real welcoming." Maria scanned the trees. "Or they're telling the truth." Another mile, another sign. This one was more blunt. "You cross this line, you're ours." I didn't like that wording. It didn't say you're dead. It said you're ours. The road opened into the remains of a small town. Storefronts with boarded windows. Burned out cars in the gutters. And everywhere, spray-painted symbols. A black circle, split down the middle by a jagged red line. The lieutenant raised a hand, signaling us to stop. He pointed at a rooftop 3 buildings ahead. A man stood there, rifles slung over his shoulder, watching us. We didn't speak, didn't wave, just kept moving. The air felt heavier here, like the town itself was holding its breath. Then we heard the first engine, low and rumbling, coming from somewhere ahead. 3 trucks rolled into view, battered but reinforced with scrap metal welded over the windows and grills. Men and women leaned out of the beds, all armed, rifles, shotguns, machetes. They slowed to a stop about 30 feet from us. The one in the lead, tall, broad shoulders, wearing a tattered leather duster, stepped down. He smiled like we were old friends. "Afternoon," he said. "Name's Mason. I run things around here." Nobody answered. I kept my shotgun angled low but ready. He looked us over, eyes lingering on my badge, the old, scratched piece of metal still pinned to my vest. "Cop, huh?" he said to me. "Bet you were real important. Before." Still, I didn't speak. Mason sighed. "See, the thing is, you crossed my bridge. My people keep that bridge clear. That means you owe me. Food, ammo, maybe something else." Jake stepped forward. "We don't owe you a damn thing." Mason's smile didn't waver, but the woman on the truck bed racked her shotgun. The lieutenant tried diplomacy. "We're just passing through." Mason's eyes lit up. "Through? Oh no, that's not how it works. You want to live past sundown. You stay. You work. You give back. We were outnumbered. If we fought here, in the open, we'd be dead before we cleared the first block. So we went with them. They took us to a fenced-off compound on the edge of town. Inside were rows of tents, makeshift gardens, and a pen where half a dozen infected were chained like guard dogs, their jaws snapping at anything that passed. "Deterrence," Mason said when he saw me looking. "People get ideas. They take a walk past our pets here, and suddenly they remember who's in charge." He led us into what used to be a school gym, now his office. We sat at a table while he explained the rules. Rule 1, no leaving without permission. Rule 2, no weapons without permission. Rule 3, everything we had was now for the community, meaning him. I clenched my jaw as 2 of his men took my shotgun. That night, they put us in a tent with cots and locked the gate outside. The air was thick with the smell of unwashed bodies and cooked beans. Maria whispered, "We can't stay here." "No," I agreed. "We can't." Around midnight, I heard something. Not the distant groans of the chained infected. Not the soft snoring of the others in the tent. It was humming. A slow, tuneless hum. Drifting through the canvas like smoke. I froze. It was coming from outside the fence, from the dark beyond the floodlights. And it was a woman's voice. I slipped to the flap of the tent and peered through a gap. There she was. A barefoot woman, standing just beyond the light's reach, head tilted, staring straight at me. Mason's men on patrol didn't even see her. She didn't move when they passed. Didn't blink. She just raised one hand and pointed toward the hills. I ducked back inside, heart pounding. Jake whispered, "What is it?" I didn't answer, because I didn't know if telling him would make him think I'd lost my mind. But deep down, I knew the truth. She'd followed us across the bridge, and if she could find us here, behind walls, surrounded by armed men, there was nowhere she couldn't go. We needed to escape Mason's compound before the barefoot woman decided to come in herself. But leaving meant breaking every one of his rules and surviving whatever punishment he used for thieves. And in my gut, I had the feeling that Mason was the kind of man who didn't punish people to teach lessons. He punished them to make examples. The camp was quiet except for the occasional bark of an order from the night patrol, and the low, constant groan of the chained infected near the gate. I lay on my cot, eyes fixed on the tent ceiling, listening to Maria's breathing a few feet away. Every few minutes I glanced at my watch. It was almost 1 in the morning. That was when Jake gave the signal. 3 light taps on the metal cot frame. We'd been planning it since sundown. No heroics. No big fights. Just get over the fence. Get into the hills and put as much distance as possible between us and Mason's little empire. Jake had lifted a coil of rope from a supply pile earlier in the day. The lieutenant had kept a single hidden blade tucked inside his boot. Me? I'd memorized the patrol's walking pattern. Maria slipped off her cot and crouched beside me. "You really think we can do this?" she whispered. I nodded. "We don't. We're dead in a week. Either Mason works us to death, or..." I didn't finish. She knew what all meant. We crept to the tent flap and peeked out. 2 guards were leaning against the fence near the chained infected, smoking and talking too loud. Good. Distracted. The fence itself wasn't high, maybe 8 feet, but it was reinforced with barbed wire at the top. We'd have to be quick and quiet. Jake went first, moving low between shadows, the rope coiled over his shoulder. The lieutenant followed, scanning left and right. Blade ready. Maria and I brought up the rear. We made it to the far side of the compound without raising an alarm. A floodlight swept past once, briefly painting us in white, but we froze and it moved on. Jake hooked the rope over the fence, wrapping cloth around the barbs to muffle the scrape. He pulled himself up, grunting softly, then dropped to the other side. The lieutenant followed. Maria hesitated. She was halfway over when a voice cut the night like a whip. "Hey!" One of Mason's men was pointing right at us, cigarette dangling from his lip. I shoved Maria over and followed without thinking, landing hard on my knees. The guard's shout turned into a full bellow. Footsteps pounded toward us. "Go!" I hissed. We sprinted toward the tree line, rope left dangling on the fence. Behind us, the gate clanged open. Boots thundered. Mason's people were giving chase. The hills weren't far, but running at night, over uneven ground, every step felt like a gamble. Branches clawed at my arms, roots grabbed my ankles. Somewhere behind us, someone fired a gun. The crack echoed through the dark. And then another sound rose up, a chorus of moans. The chained infected at the gate had heard the gunfire. And they weren't the only ones. We pushed into the trees, lungs burning. Jake led, the lieutenant in the middle, Maria just ahead of me. The ground sloped upward, and for a moment I thought we'd actually gotten away. Then I heard the laughter. It wasn't Mason's men. It wasn't close either. It was faint, distant, but somehow cutting right through the noise of our run. A woman's laugh. Light. Almost playful. Maria heard it too. She froze, looking over her shoulder into the dark we'd just come from. I grabbed her arm. "Don't stop." Gunshots cracked again. Closer this time. We dropped low, letting the brush hide us, and crawled up a narrow game trail. When we finally paused to catch our breath, Jake scanned the ridge below. I think He didn't finish, because a figure was walking between the trees at the base of the hill. The barefoot woman. Even at this distance, I could see her clearly in my mind's eye. White dress torn at the hem, hair matted to her face, head tilted just slightly to one side. She wasn't moving fast. She didn't have to. She knew where we were going. Mason's men weren't far behind her, flashlights slicing through the dark. For one horrifying second, I thought they were together, but the way the men moved told me they hadn't even noticed her. She passed within feet of one of them, and he didn't react. He couldn't see her. My stomach turned to ice. "Up the hill," I whispered. We scrambled higher, our breaths loud in the cold air. The lieutenant slipped once, nearly tumbling back, but Jake hauled him up. At the top, the trees thinned, revealing a narrow plateau with the ruins of a fire lookout tower. The stairs were mostly intact. It wasn't much, but it was high ground. And right now, that was something. We climbed fast, wood creaking under our weight. From the top, we could see the valley below. Mason's men sweeping through it, their flashlights flickering like fireflies. And between them, the barefoot woman. She'd stopped now, standing perfectly still in the middle of the clearing. Then she tilted her head back and screamed. It wasn't a human scream. It was high and shrill, like metal tearing in half, like the air itself was splitting. The sound carried for miles. And then the moaning started again. Dozens of voices. Hundreds. From the darkness beyond the patrol lights, shapes began to move. The infected. Drawn to her like moths to a flame. She didn't run. She just turned and started walking toward the hills. Toward us. With the horde following. Jake swore under his breath. She's bringing them here. The lieutenant's hands tightened on his blade. She's not just infected. She's... He didn't finish. Below, Mason's men noticed the horde too late. Their gunfire cracked through the night. But the infected were already among them. Flashlights whipped wildly, beams slashing across screaming faces. The plateau became a front row seat to carnage. We had a choice. Stay in the tower and hope they didn't climb, or run now and risk the open hillside. Maria looked at me, eyes wide. What do we do? I stared down at the chaos below. The horde wasn't just moving at random. It was moving with purpose, like it had a leader. And that leader was looking right at me. Her face was tilted up toward the tower now, pale in the moonlight. And even from this distance, I could see her mouth moving. She was saying something. I didn't hear it, but I knew, without knowing how, that it was my name. The first infected reached the base of the plateau in less than a minute. By the second minute, there were dozens clawing at the dirt, pulling themselves up the slope. From the lookout tower, the view below was a vision straight out of hell. Mason's camp guards screaming, firing into the swarm, their flashlights sweeping over pale faces and gnashing teeth. The gunfire only seemed to rile the horde. Every shot was a dinner bell. "She's not stopping," Jake muttered, pointing. The barefoot woman was still walking uphill. Slow. Measured. Her head tilted at that unnatural angle. Her eyes locked on me. Even with the battle raging below, she moved untouched. The infected parted for her. A deafening crack split the night. Not gunfire, but wood. I looked down and saw hands, dozens of them, grasping the tower's supports. They weren't just climbing the slope anymore. They were climbing us. "We gotta move," I shouted. Jake drew his pistol and fired downward, each shot exploding skulls, sending bodies tumbling back into the mass below. But for every one that fell, 3 more took its place. The lieutenant slashed at the first to grab the stairs, splitting its face open. But another hand was already there, gripping the railing. The wood groaned under their combined weight. Maria grabbed my arm. Which way? I scanned the hilltops. To the east, more forest, thick and dark. To the west, open ridgeline, but there was firelight in the distance. Maybe another camp. Either way, the horde was closing in fast. East, I decided. The trees will slow them down. Jake and the lieutenant covered us while Maria and I went first. We climbed over the railing, dropping to the hillside a few feet below, rolling in the dirt. The earth was loose here, sliding under our boots as we scrambled down the far side of the plateau. Gunfire and screams behind us told me the tower wouldn't hold. Then it happened. A thunderous crack, louder than before. I turned just in time to see one of the supports splinter completely. The lookout tower groaned, tipped, and then collapsed in a cloud of dust and snapping boards. I didn't see if Jake and the lieutenant made it out in time. "Move!" Maria shouted, yanking me forward. We tore through the underbrush, branches whipping our faces. Somewhere behind us, the barefoot woman's scream split the night again. That awful, metallic wail. And the forest answered. Groans, snarls, the sound of feet and claws tearing through the earth. The moonlight barely reached us under the thick canopy. We stumbled over roots, slid down muddy embankments, and vaulted over fallen logs. The noise behind us never stopped. Then, gunfire again. Jake's voice, shouting. They'd made it. They caught up with us in a clearing, both of them panting, blood streaking their arms. "Tower's gone," Jake said between breaths. They're all over it. The lieutenant spat into the dirt. We've got maybe a few minutes before they're on us again. That was when we heard the other sound. Not groaning, not gunfire, engines. Through the trees, headlights flickered. 2 trucks, moving fast along a rough trail parallel to the ridge. Jake crouched low. Could be friendlies. I shook my head. Could be worse than Mason. We didn't get to decide. A shout rang out, followed by a blinding sweep of light. Hold it right there. Men poured from the trucks, armed. But their rifles weren't pointed at us. They were aimed at the tree line behind us. Because the horde had found us again. Move, someone yelled, waving us toward the vehicles. We didn't hesitate. We sprinted for the trucks as the first infected broke from the brush. The armed men opened fire, their shots controlled and precise. Heads burst, bodies dropped, but the mass kept coming. We dove into the bed of the nearest truck. An older man in a long coat jumped in after us, barking orders to the driver. Punch it. The truck roared forward, jostling us violently as it bounced over ruts. Behind us, the headlights illuminated a nightmare. Hundreds of infected flooding into the road, tripping over each other, still chasing. Maria clung to the side rail. Where are you taking us? The man in the coat glanced at her, his face hard and unreadable. Somewhere you can breathe. For now. Jake didn't buy it. And then what? You put us in chains like Mason. The man smiled without humor. You're alive. That's the only currency that matters anymore. The truck skidded around a bend, nearly throwing us over the side. Ahead, the second vehicle hit something. An infected that had wandered onto the road, and its body crumpled under the tires with a sickening thud. The smell of rot followed us. I looked back one last time. The horde was falling behind, but only barely, and at the very front, keeping pace better than she should have been able to, was the barefoot woman. Her eyes locked on mine again, and for the first time I realized she wasn't just following me. She was herding us. 15 minutes later, the trucks pulled into a fortified gate. Higher walls than Mason's, reinforced with scrap metal and barbed wire. Armed sentries opened the way just long enough for us to pass before slamming it shut again. We'd arrived in another camp. But as we climbed out of the truck, I noticed something. These people were organized. Cleaner, better armed, more disciplined than Mason's ragtag crew. They weren't just surviving. They were building something. The man in the coat gestured for us to follow. Welcome to Haven. It didn't sound like a threat. But I'd learned by now that in this world, every safe place had a cost. And something told me that Haven's price might be worse than the horde outside its walls. The first thing I noticed about Haven was the smell. Not rot, not gunpowder. It smelled like bread, freshly baked. It was almost cruel. The scent tugging at a part of me I'd buried months ago. The part that still remembered normal life. The man in the long coat, who introduced himself as Grant, led us through the central gate. Inside, there were no shanty shelters or tents like Mason's camp. These were actual houses, patched together from salvaged lumber and scavenged siding, but standing straight and weatherproof. In the center, under a canopy, people were eating around long tables, laughing. Maria slowed, watching a little boy chase a dog across the dusty main street. Is this real? She whispered. Jake answered for me. It's bait. Places like this always have a hook. Grant either didn't hear him or pretended not to. We run a tight ship here, he said. No freeloaders. Everyone works, everyone eats. The lieutenant, ever the soldier, scanned every rooftop and alley. You got snipers? Grant smirked. We've got eyes everywhere. That's why you made it here alive. We were led to a squat concrete building near the far wall. Inside, it was cooler, the air faintly metallic. A young woman in a white apron handed us metal cups filled with water and something that tasted like stew. I nearly cried when the first spoonful hit my tongue. For a while, we sat in silence, just eating. It was the first time in weeks I'd felt my hands stop shaking. When the bowls were empty, Grant leaned forward. "You can stay the night. Tomorrow, we'll talk about how you can contribute here." Jake narrowed his eyes. "And if we decide to keep moving?" Grant's smile didn't reach his eyes. "You won't." That night, Maria and I were given a small cabin. 2 cots, a single lantern, a door that actually locked. It was more comfort than I'd had since the outbreak started. But sleep didn't come easy. Somewhere past midnight, I woke to the faintest sound. Not groaning, not footsteps. A whisper. At first, I thought it was Maria talking in her sleep. But when I turned, I saw her sitting upright, her eyes glassy, staring at the window. I followed her gaze, and there, outside the wall, framed by moonlight, stood the barefoot woman. She didn't move, didn't press against the fence or try to climb. She just stood there, her head tilted, lips moving soundlessly. Maria blinked once, and when I turned back to the window, the woman was gone. Morning came with the smell of coffee. Actual coffee. People gathered in the central square, trading goods, repairing clothes, handing out tools. It looked civilized. Grant made his rounds, greeting everyone by name. When he reached us, his tone was warm, but his eyes assessed us like weapons on a rack. "You'll start with wall duty," he told Jake and the lieutenant. "Maria, you'll help in the infirmary. And you," he said, turning to me, "are riding with the scavengers today. We've got a convoy headed to a supply cache." It was clear there wasn't room for debate. The scavenger run started calm enough. 3 trucks, a dozen armed guards, and me in the passenger seat of a battered pickup. The driver, a thin man named Porter, filled the silence with easy chatter. "You'll like it here," he said. "Food, shelter, protection, all Grant asks is loyalty." I asked what that meant. He didn't answer directly. Instead, he said, "It's simple. You stay, you work. You don't cause trouble, ever." We reached the supply site, a collapsed grocery store, and spent hours loading crates of canned goods and bottled water. Everything was organized, tagged, logged. It was efficient. Too efficient. I'd seen settlements before. None were this clean, this ordered. It didn't feel like survival. It felt like control. By the time we returned, the sun was setting. That's when I saw the lieutenant, or rather, where he wasn't. Jake was pacing by the cabin. "They took him," he said quietly. Said he broke protocol. He didn't even get to explain. I looked toward the far end of the camp, where a locked gate led to a separate, smaller section of wall. 2 guards stood there, rifles ready. Grant approached before we could speak further. "Dinner's ready. You'll want to eat before curfew." Maria joined us, looking pale. I asked about her day in the infirmary, but she avoided my eyes. Finally, she whispered, "The patients. They're not all wounded. Some are healthy, or they were, and they're locked in." That night, the whispers returned. This time, I didn't look to the window. I already knew who I'd see, but something new happened. A cold draft rolled through the room, and when I glanced toward the door, the latch was lifting. From the inside, the door creaked open a fraction, enough for me to glimpse movement in the darkness beyond. Not a guard, not a neighbor, a shape too thin, too still. Maria stirred, but didn't wake. And then, as quickly as it had moved, The door clicked shut again. I didn't sleep at all after that. By morning, Haven still smelled like bread and coffee. The people still smiled. But now, every laugh, every handshake, every polite nod felt like something rehearsed. Like a mask. Grant found me in the square. "Come with me," he said. And just like that, I knew, whatever was behind that smaller section of wall, I was about to see it. Grant led me past the central square, down a narrow lane I hadn't walked before. The air cooled as we neared the smaller gate at the far end of Haven. The one guarded day and night. Today, the guard stepped aside. The moment the gate opened, the smell hit me. Not bread, not coffee. Rot. Inside, the second wall wasn't a defense line, it was a cage. Rows of chain-link pens stretched out before us. In each pen, 3 or 4 people huddled together, pale and glassy-eyed. Some sat rocking. Others stared blankly at the ground, and a few, I recognized them. One was the lieutenant. He stood at the edge of his pen, gripping the mesh. When he saw me, his lips moved soundlessly, then formed 2 words. "Don't trust." Grant's voice broke my trance. "We have to be careful. Infection doesn't always show right away. Sometimes it takes days. We keep them here until we're certain they're safe. Or not." He said it like a farmer talking about culling livestock. I glanced at a nearby pen and saw why. One of the prisoners, a young woman, convulsed, her skin mottling grey as her gums bled. A guard opened the gate, walked in with a silenced pistol, and ended it without hesitation. The body was dragged to a covered trench. Grant kept talking. "This is why Haven survives. We contain the risk. We act before it spreads." But something about the lieutenant's stare. This wasn't just about infection. I turned to leave, but Grant caught my arm. "Your group is lucky. None of you showed symptoms yet." The yet stayed with me all the way back to our cabin. That night, I told Maria everything. Jake listened in silence until I finished, then muttered, "I told you. Bait. They make it look perfect, but it's a trap. A slow one." Maria's voice shook. In the infirmary, they didn't just treat wounds. They took blood from everyone. Every one. Whether they were sick or not. We didn't get time to decide what to do next. Because that's when the screaming started. It came from the wall, the main wall. And it wasn't the sound of 1 or 2 infected. It was a wave. The alarm bell clanged and guards ran for the barricades. Grant barked orders from the square, his voice hard but calm. And then, through the dust at the far edge of my vision, I saw her. The barefoot woman. She walked at the head of the horde, her pale feet leaving no marks in the dirt. The infected around her didn't lunge or growl, they marched. They were following her. Gunfire erupted from the walls, but the horde didn't break. It pressed forward, slow and steady, like the tide. Then the whispering started, not just in my head. I could see others freezing mid-stride, their eyes going distant, mouths moving as if repeating something they couldn't stop. Maria grabbed my hand. "She's in their heads. She's in my head." I pulled her toward the gate, but the nearest guard blocked us. "Back to your quarters. Grant's orders." The horde reached the wall. Instead of clawing or climbing, the infected simply pressed against it. Hundreds of bodies leaning forward in perfect unison. The wood and steel groaned under the weight. And then, with a sickening crack, a section buckled. The guards fired into the mass, but for every infected that fell, 3 more pushed forward. And the barefoot woman, she just kept walking. Straight through the breach. Inside the walls, chaos erupted. People scattered, some toward the inner cage, others toward the main gate. Grant shouted for the candidates to be locked down, and I realized he meant us. Jake fired first, dropping the guard who came for him. "Move!" he yelled, and we sprinted toward the outer street. But the infected were already there. The first one to reach me wasn't snarling or clawing. It just stared, lips trembling as if about to speak. Then it lunged. I shoved it back and fired point blank. Blood sprayed, warm and heavy. The shot barely registered in my ears over the roar of chaos. Maria was beside me, screaming something I couldn't hear. Jake was ahead, clearing a path. The lieutenant appeared from nowhere, armed with a stolen rifle. "They're not here for you," he shouted, grabbing my arm. "They're here for her." I didn't have to ask who her was. We cut through the side streets, heading for the smaller gate, the one to the cage. It was madness, but the lieutenant's plan was clear. That section had its own exit. Behind us, the barefoot woman stepped into the square. Every infected in sight dropped to one knee, and then she looked at me. It was like ice in my skull. Her lips moved, whispering something I couldn't hear but could feel. For a heartbeat, my feet stopped moving entirely. Maria screamed my name, breaking the spell. We reached the smaller gate, but 2 infected prisoners were already free, tearing into a guard. The lieutenant kicked one away and fired on the other, his face set in grim determination. "Go," he yelled. "I'll hold them." Jake didn't argue. He shoved Maria through the opening, then me. We stumbled out into the night beyond Haven's walls. No streets, no lights, just dark fields and the distant moan of the horde. Behind us, the screams rose. We ran until the lights of Haven were a faint glow behind us. When we finally stopped, bent over and gasping, I turned to look back. From here, the whole settlement seemed to flicker, like the flames of a dying fire. And at the center of it all, I could still see her, the barefoot woman, standing on the wall, watching us. Jake spat into the dirt. "That's it. Haven's gone." Maria hugged herself, shivering. "She's not gone. She's coming." I didn't know where we'd go next, or how far we could run before she found us. But one thing was certain. The outbreak wasn't just in the bodies anymore. It was in the mind. And there's no wall high enough to keep that out.